For round 6, I'm not going to look at one particular game. I'm going to present 3 games, but just the highlights. I'm going to be looking at the 3 decisive games to just show you the conclusions. Well, these games were all absolutely fascinating, incredibly complex, and I'm going to start with Pentara Harikrishna against Efan. We joined the game after 44 moves, and Harikrishna, after a very long strategic battle, managed to win a pawn, but Efan was fighting really hard, and she's achieved a position where, yes, her king is somewhat exposed, but it has some security here, and she has an active queen and a rook. Harikrishna's problem is that this rook on b4, which for a long time was exerting nice pressure on this pawn, at this exact moment is somewhat out of play. If the rook had come into play, let's say on g4, well, the game would be over fairly quickly, but yeah, it's a problem. And so in this position, Harikrishna, to try and, well, just relieve the pressure on his position and transpose into a simpler position, played queen e3. It's probably the best move in the position. And here, well, they'd already been playing something like 4 hours, and Efan backed down. She played queen c8, and after e5, Harikrishna managed to break through. This freed the rook. But this is a really interesting moment. She thought for 9 minutes over this decision, but she really should have exchanged on e3, which means, well, she goes into this ending a pawn down, and also this one is about to fall, because if the rook defends like this, then it's possible just to play this and a4 and take here and take here. So in this situation, black has to give up another pawn. Perhaps she'd underestimated this, but it seems to me this gives black excellent drawing chances. I mean, it might even simply be impossible for white to win this position. So for example, rook takes, the king comes to this glorious square e5, and now we can see the problem that white's king is cut off. And here black's rook can come into the position, and this should be enough for black to draw, just because of the incredibly poor position of white's king. These pawns are vulnerable, and sometimes there's even a threat to come in and create, well, a very dangerous attack. Or in this position, if the king comes across here, well, the king going backwards, and the g-pawn starts to become very dangerous. So if the king comes up the board, well, let's try this. Well, b3 is possible, but here rook a7 is a very good move, and this is going to be enough for black to draw. And in this position, king takes g5, which, I mean, looks fantastic for white. White is 2 pawns up, but the problem is white's king is now completely stuck on the g-file. And this is actually an easy draw for black. So a big moment, and I think a misjudgment from Efan there. As I said, she backed down, and after e5, this is tremendous for white, because now black's king is significantly less secure than white's, and this passed d-pawn, of course, gives white protection and, well, is a tremendous trump in the position. And white just has to maintain coordination. White's major pieces just look fantastic. And now queen takes g5. I mean, there was nothing really that black could do here. Of course, if rook g6, then rook e7 check, and the rook drops. And this is how the game ended. Queen c5 and queen h5 check was the final move of the game. If rook check, then this one is going to be a win. White will liquidate into a winning king and pawn game. Or if king here, then, well, this is very quickly a mating attack, and so on. Not too difficult. So a really tough game, and Harikrishna certainly coming into his own over the last few games. He is a class act. So next game. Well, this is the finish between Ruslan Ponomarov and David Navara. And round about here, well, this is a very complex Najdorf position, but I think Navara has basically gone a bit wrong in retreating his queen. And this is the moment that Ruslan Ponomarov decided to strike forward, because he just felt, well, with all white's pieces here, ready to switch over to the king side, and black's king looking, well, doesn't have many defenders around it, so he felt this was very logical. Probably Navara should take this pawn, and of course white is better, but it's still messy. Instead, Navara played queen c7, and now things just rolled ever stronger in the direction of black's king. So, for example, if pawn takes pawn, then you can see everything is pointing in the right direction now. If g5, just rook takes f4, and white is crashing through, which is basically what happened in the game. Rook takes c4, rook g3. Well, this pushes the bishop back. Navara responded with d5. If the bishop goes back, then f5 is incredibly strong. Just ready with these fairly basic moves, in any order you want, really. Navara played d5, and still f5 was incredibly strong. d4, and now bishop h6. Let's just go through the final moves. If pawn takes, then rook takes is very simple. If black defends on the 6th rank, then f6. Very straightforward, actually, nothing flashy. Rook here played. Bishop takes g7, threatening a mate here. Rook e3, trying to block, but this didn't really help that much. So these are still big threats. King takes, and now it's a forced mate. And that's a nice move. Queen takes, controls d7, so it's impossible for black's king to run away. Of course, that's a threat. King e8, and now there are two wins. You can either play rook g2 or the move that Ponomarov played, rook d2, cutting the king, threatening mate. And if queen c5, then check, and mate on the back rank. Very nice. So the ending was very straightforward, but quite attractive. And Ponomarov sort of held his nerve very well in this game, actually. Tricky middle game, but he thought things through very well. And the final game I want to look at is Rafael Vaganyan against Noah Studer. Now, this was an unbelievable game, which swung back and forth. Vaganyan looked to have a tremendous opening, but misplayed things, and in fact Studer stood better going into an endgame. And here it's it's very messy. You can see white has these fantastic passed pawns, but they are blockaded by the king. Black is the exchange up, Studer is the exchange up. Two rooks against rook and bishop. Very, very tricky position. At first we thought that Studer was simply better here, because this pawn is falling, and it's very hard to get the pawns rolling. But Vaganyan defended very nicely. Bishop d4, putting the question to the rook. And after the game, Vaganyan thought that perhaps rook f7 would be the best move, and this keeps the rook out of the game. In fact, the move that Studer played, rook h7, is also okay. Looked very logical, of course, coming behind the passed pawn. We thought this was, at the time when we were commentating on this live, we thought this was actually turning in black's favour. After this, and a6. So, it's very hard for white to come forward, because there's no threat, because of the pin, there's no threat to push the c-pawn. But here Vaganyan found an excellent manoeuvre, which I must admit we had overlooked completely. Rook f4, and the idea is to encircle black's king, and this is incredibly dangerous. h4. The rook came down to f8. And I have to say, we completely misanalyzed this when we were looking at this live. It's such a tricky position. Probably the simplest way for Studer to draw this is to play king c6. And the idea is that if white tries to encircle with rook a8, then the king can come back, obviously prevents rook a7 check. And then the rook comes here, threatening rook e7, and then the king comes back again, and this should be a draw by repetition, and so on. Instead, Studer played h3. And after this, suddenly there is big trouble. Unbelievably, this is still a draw. Perhaps, yeah, I'll come back to this position in a moment. So rook h4 was played in the game. It's actually, now it's lost. c6. And these pawns are too dangerous. And, well, there are so many tricks here. At first we thought d7 was a winning move, but after this, rook d5 is an absolutely brilliant defense. So preventing the pawn queening, and of course if king takes rook, then you queen with check. That's the big trick. Absolutely fantastic defense, which we'd completely overlooked. Instead, Vachier played c7. Correct. He'd analysed it perfectly. So threaten your queen, and when the king comes here, then rook a8. Threatening to make a queen, and if check, and rook d5. You don't take it, but you just nudge to the side, and then queen with check on the next turn, and that's the end. So let me come back to this position. So here's where Studer played h3. Yep, this was still okay, and now there's an unbelievable draw for black in this position. Of course, the computer showed us how to do it. Rook takes pawn, bishop takes, now rook h4 check, so this avoids any nasty skewer here. Check again, king comes back. Check again, and the best that white has is just to repeat the position with king d5, because if king d3, now the pawn can advance, and both sides get a queen, but in this position black is first with the checks, and of course it's very easy to see that white's king is completely powerless to defend with all the other pieces at the other end of the board. So there we go. In this position, rook takes pawn, incredibly, would still be a draw, because that will be a draw by perpetual, or repeating the position. White has to keep an active rook, because here, if h2, then, well, this attack is now too strong. Yeah, black has to be terribly careful. Black can still lose, but if the rook keeps checking, then it's still a draw. Incredibly complex, and well, of course, I'm very pleased for Vachier that he won this game. It's his first win in the tournament, but great pity for Noah Studer, who is playing very ambitiously and I think deserves more from the positions he's reached in the tournament.